Hi everyone, my name is Jeffrey Lee, and welcome to the 8th episode of this series where I talk about my book, Fair Trade in Human Civilizations. Today, we're going to start by discussing Chapter 3, where we talk about fair trade in North America. So, starting us off with Section 3.1, we're talking about the east coast of North America and the fair trade that happened there. And as you can see in this picture, you can see the first 13 colonies. So the development of the North American colonies has lagged behind that of the Latin American colonies of Spain and Portugal because of Columbus's early discovery of North America. Although the North American colonies were also discovered around the same time, their population, area, and output grew slowly. The Spanish colonies had vast reserves of silver mines and other precious metals. However, the Northern American colonies unfortunately did not have as many of these resources and had to find some to help them grow. Spanish colonies had implemented a centralized management systems, while North American colonies were not as organized. However, later on, this was helped by the fervent fur trade. As early as the 11th century in the story of Eric the Red, Thorfinn Kallisvinni had exchanged cloth for furs with the indigenous people of North America. This helped spur the northern colonies' development and were important to helping them become and grow to the United States of America we know now. So let's start by talking about Dutch civilization in North America. As early as the 16th century, the Dutch had profited significantly from trading furs with Russia, making them acutely aware of the importance of expanding the fur trade. Henry Hudson was dedicated to finding a northern sea route from Europe to Asia and set sail from Amsterdam in April 1609. His explorations revealed numerous indigenous people with abundant furs such as mink, fox, and beaver, along with a strong desire to trade. The newly discovered Delaware and Hudson rivers, which were not part of the French colonies, also had rich fur resources. At that time, fur trading in Europe was highly profitable, and securing a steady supply of abundant and expensive high-quality furs were extremely attractive to the British, Dutch, French, and others involved in the fur trade. So the Dutch prepared ships, recruited crew members, and selected sellers, spending about a year in preparation. In 1611, the Dutch first set sail from Amsterdam on the St. Pieter and successfully established a colony in North America. A year later, the Van Twin Hudson Company sent the Fortune, captained by Adrian Block, to the North American colony, successfully reaching the destination and immediately purchasing furs. To encourage the exploration of new routes, harbors, and fur sources, the Dutch Parliament granted new explorers exclusive trading rights for 4 voyages in newly discovered regions. Later, Adrian Block extensively explored the Hudson River Valley and named the vast territory between British Virginia and French Canada New Netherland on his maps. In 1614, the New Netherland Company constructed Fort Nassau on Castle Island in Albany, New York, as the first trading post for its North American colony, equipping the fort with cannons and garrison troops. Unlike the Russians, who subjugated indigenous people and imposed a harsh tribute system, the Dutch pioneers of the New Netherland Company primarily sought greater profits from fur trading rather than claiming all the land and its inhabitants. The Dutch also explored the Delaware and Connecticut rivers and reached as far as Narragansett Bay, actively engaging with more indigenous groups and expanding the fur trade. Many indigenous tribes in North America valued shell beads, using them for ceremonial purposes to signify status, as tributes, reparations, peace offerings, and high-value inter-tribal trade currency, similar to the use of gold and silver as currency globally. Once the Dutch discovered this, they began to exploit them, and finding shells and trading them for furs. Although Dutch merchants obtained a large quantity of high-quality furs and earned significant profits from New Netherland, the Dutch were also heavily invested in trade in Southeast Asia. As mentioned in Chapter 1, the Dutch, like the Portuguese and Spaniards, profited enormously from triangular trade involving mainland China, Japan, and Taiwan, continually transporting spices, tea, silk, and porcelain back to Europe, earning the title of the carriers of the sea. Now let's also talk about the British North American colonies. So as early as 1606, King James I of England declared that all lands between 34 and 45 degrees north latitude in North America were British colonies. The early years of the Jamestown colony were fraught with difficulties due to famine and disease. So, the Jamestown colony developed a profitable model based on tobacco, unlike New York, which relied on fur. The reasons of varying relevance are as follows. First is on initial survival and agricultural development. They urgently needed to clear land and develop agriculture to survive. They discovered its suitability for tobacco cultivation, and it was something they were familiar with, so they chose it over fur. There were also land conflicts and hostile relationships with natives, climate considerations, and preferences for maritime trade. In summary, the primary factor was that the Jamestown settlers valued tobacco's economic benefits over fur. However, later on they decided to compete with the Dutch colonists along the east coast. On September 6, 1620, the Mayflower set sail from Europe and approached the coast of North America on November 9th of the same year. They disembarked at Plymouth with little supplies and little people. In September of 1621, the Plymouth settlers traveled by boat to trade furs with Native Americans in Massachusetts and explored the surrounding terrain. They discovered Boston, a port with many rivers flowing through the Atlantic Ocean. In November of 1621, the second British immigrant ship, the Fortune, arrived at Plymouth with 37 settlers. On its return voyage, the Fortune carried back 2 large barrels of beaver and sea otter pelts, valued at approximately 500 pounds. In August of 1622, the British ship Discovery arrived at Plymouth loaded with knives, beads, and other goods. They then continued and found that they could turn a great profit by trading furs with the natives. The increased volume of fur trading led to the near extinction of beavers and other animals around Plymouth. Consequently, the settlers explored along the northern and southern coast to find Native Americans with furs. As the Plymouth colony took root and stabilized, more British settlers arrived on the east coast of North America and established various colonial settlements. The Plymouth settlers adopted a long-term strategy of cultivating crops and engaging in fur trading, with each settlement experiencing different conditions. A typical conflict occurred in 1627 between the Plymouth colony and the Massachusetts colony established by Thomas Morton, known as the Maypole Incident. In 1624, Thomas Morton founded the Marymount colony in Massachusetts, characterized by its liberal and loose social structure and close relations with the local Native Americans, engaging in frequent trade. This led to competition and conflict. In 1628, after receiving a colonial charter from King Charles I of England, John Endicott led a group of British immigrants to the Massachusetts Bay and established the town of Salem. The series of actions by the Massachusetts Bay left the Plymouth settlers feeling deeply betrayed, escalating tensions between the two groups. In 1634, the famous Hawking incident occurred over the competition of fur resources in Maine. Plymouth settlers had intercepted Massachusetts Bay settlers who bypassed the trading post, leading to an armed conflict in the Massachusetts Bay colonies, but no punishment was given to the culprit, undermining Plymouth's judicial fairness and administrative authority. Now let's talk about the European struggle for dominance in North American colonies. The direct interaction between British and Dutch colonists in North America increased with territorial expansion. The French had been engaged in a fur trade in North America for many years, and as Plymouth colonists expanded their fur trade northward, they inevitably clashed with the French. The Dutch colonists also became aware of the Mayflower arrival in America shortly after it had happened. In March 1627, Isaac de Raziris, the Secretary of New Amsterdam, wrote to the British colonists in Plymouth for the first time. Although disputes initially arose over trading territories with Native Americans, the parties quickly set aside their differences and began cooperating. Turning to the Dutch New Netherland colony, the Dutch West India Company, established in 1621, prioritized fur trading posts over settlement colonies. They turned great profits from the fur trade. These struggles for dominance in North America illustrate the complex interactions and conflicts among European powers and their colonial ambitions. This led to many conflicts that helped shape the relationships between these European countries, all due to the fur trade. So now let's talk about the Connecticut River Valley. The expansion of fur trading by various European nations led to overlapping areas of operation. In 1634, the Dutch and New Netherland discovered that the French from the north were buying furs from the Native Americans near Fort Lagrange at higher prices. They restored the fur trade and continued diplomatic negotiations with the British and alliance with Native American tribes in Connecticut. In 1633, the Dutch established Fort Good Hope in Hartford. That same year, British settlers from Plymouth established Fort Windsor on the Lewes Connecticut River, competing directly with the Dutch. Subsequently, more British colonists entered the Connecticut River Valley. In 1638, British colonists from Massachusetts established the New Haven colony on the Quinnipiac River in the Connecticut Valley. In 1636, leaders from the Massachusetts and Connecticut British colonies decided to attack the Pequot tribe, who lived in the southeastern Connecticut. The Pequot had long besieged Fort Saybrook, where British colonists were trapped. These interactions in the Connecticut River Valley illustrate the complex and often contentious relationships between European colonial powers and Native American tribes. The competition for the control of fur trading territories and the expansion of colonial settlements led to frequent conflicts and shifting alliances, shaping the early colonial landscape of the region. So now let's also talk about the Delaware River Valley. Sweden also joined the fierce competition in the North American fur trade. After being dismissed as the first governor of New England and purchasing Manhattan Island, Peter Minuit used his extensive experience in local administration to design a commercial plan for purchasing land from the Native Americans based on legal ownership principles. Minuit knew that the Dutch were unable to effectively manage the Delaware area and successfully persuaded the Swedish crown to support establishing a Swedish colony in the Delaware River Valley, south of the Dutch-controlled Hudson Valley and north of the British-controlled Virginia. In April of 1641, a British ship from the New Haven colony in Connecticut entered the Delaware River. Led by Captain George Lamberton, the British began competing for control of the Delaware Valley. Lamberton purchased large tracts of land on both sides of the Delaware River from the local Native Americans and established a trading post at Varkin's Kill, downstream from Fort Christina, with over 60 settlers from New Haven. The competition between British and New Netherland continued fiercely. Meanwhile, British settlers from Massachusetts also moved to the Delaware River, hoping to find a legendary Lake Iroquois, rumored to be surrounded by abundant beaver populations. After 1647, further conflicts arose between the Dutch and Swedes. The Swedish forts on the lower Delaware River frequently intercepted and confiscated Dutch ships and their cargoes of furs. To control the river's mouth, the Dutch built Fort Beaverseed at the river's entrance. By this time, the population of New Sweden had dwindled to less than 100, and the Swedes had to concentrate their resources in one fort, requesting reinforcements from Sweden. These conflicts in the Delaware River Valley highlight the intense rivalry between European powers for control of the fur trade and territorial dominance in North America. The strategic importance of the Delaware River Valley made it a local point of colonial ambitions, resulting in frequent clashes and shifting alliances. Now, let's end by talking about the Anglo-Dutch confrontation. In the northern regions of Connecticut and the Long Island, British colonists from New England steadily encroached upon New Netherland territory. Considering that the population of New England was 10 times that of New Netherland, the Dutch, despite their momentum from driving out the Swedes, were cautious about launching military attacks. Although the North American Colonial Alliance agreed to dispatch an armed force of 100 to 150 men to escort settlers to the Delaware River, the cost was to be paid by the people of New Haven, which they could not afford, resulting in abandonment of the expedition. In August of 1664, British King Charles II dispatched Colonel Richard Nichols with 4 warships laden with cannons and soldiers to the mouth of the Hudson River. They landed and occupied the coast of New Amsterdam. Given the overwhelming military disparity, New Amsterdam Governor Peter Stuyvesant attempted resistance but faced opposition from the residents and lacked adequate war supplies. In 1667, the Treaty of Breda was signed between England and the Netherlands. England ceded Suriname, a small country in South America, to the Dutch, who recognized English sovereignty over New Netherland. This exchange of colonies effectively unified the British colonies in North America. This section undergoes the strategic confrontations and territorial disputes between European powers in North America. The Dutch and British rivalry, marked by treaties and military engagements, significantly shaped the colonial boundaries and influenced the geopolitical landscape of the region, all thanks to the fur trade and the valuableness of fur.